theology and ethics should not be, in two different zip codes, shall we say. They're in the same zip code as far as I'm concerned, because what is
Mhm.
what is believed is not just to be stated, but Jesus said, "Follow me," not just talk about me.
All right. Well, hello and welcome everybody to the Jude 3 project. My name is Dr. Vince Bacote, and I'm a guest host on our podcast today. And I am here today, and I'm going to be joined with a friend and colleague of mine. And we're going to be talking about a new book that we've written together entitled Gospel Haymanot, a Constructive Theology and Critical Reflection on African and Diasporic Christianity. So this is a new book that we are very excited to offer to all of you. We're excited to be working with the Jude 3 Project because we know that the vision and mission of the Jude 3 Project is to equip the body of Christ, and especially in the Black community and the Black church, with apologetic and evangelistic and theological resources. And that's exactly what this book is. And what it is actually an edited volume written by a team of African American and Black scholars of various theological disciplines. And what we have done has attempted to provide to the church theological categories that emerge uniquely from the Black experience and from the Black perspective and from Afrocentric concepts that hold equally strong to the values of the truth of the gospel, as well as the value of liberative justice for the oppressed. And part of the motivation that gave rise to this is seeing a lack of holistic theology, or what we call a gospelist theology, or a Haymanot. And again, that's part of the Afrocentric piece, is that Haymanot is an ancient African concept and term equivalent to the Greek term theos and logos, Haymanot meaning theology, doctrine, way of life. And there's a need in the academy, and especially from the Black perspective, which has really been given witness in the Black church, of a holistic Haymanot, and this is what we mean when we say a gospelist Haymanot, that is equally concerned with matters of truth and biblical orthodoxy, as well as justice and liberation and the flourishing, especially and taking into account God's heart and priority for the marginalized and the oppressed. And so in that way, there's graceful critique and conversation with dominant evangelical, or also in the academy, that in the Black perspective, the dominant liberationist or womanist perspectives. And this is what we are offering, entitling it Gospelist perspective, that really emerges from the Black church. But unfortunately, that perspective hasn't been given as much voice in the academy, which is predominantly white. And so we, as African-American scholars who still hold to that holistic tradition of the Black church, are coming into this book, giving theological and academic framing to the lived theology of the Black church that's been around for several hundred years. And again, it's an edited volume, so we come at it from various perspectives. Myself, as a patristic scholar, I was able to write the intro and conclusion, and also throw a chapter in there from my kind of perspective as a patristics or early Christian scholar. And we've already had interviews even with some of the other authors coming at it from practical theology, some from history, some from biblical studies. But today we are going to be joined, and we're going to hear about one of the chapters in this book, Gospel Haymanot, from our resident theologian, public theologian and systematic theologian, Dr. Vincent Bacote. And so at this time, it is my esteemed privilege to introduce to you all Dr. Vincent Bacote, who is going to be joining us now, and we're going to have a conversation about his particular chapter in this book. And so it is a great pleasure for me to introduce to you all Dr. Vincent Bacote. Welcome, Dr. Bacote, this afternoon.
Good to be with you.
Yes, you too. Dr. Bacote, I wonder if you might be able to just kind of start off by introducing and telling the audience a little bit about yourself. And I would like to maybe even begin that by saying that it's a special treat for me to be able to have written this book with you, and now to be having this interview with you, because some folks might not know, but I got my start in theology as an undergraduate student at Wheaton College, where Dr. Bacote is a professor and was actually my advisor many moons ago. We won't say how many moons, but a little while back. So this is a great honor to see the Lord bringing us full circle. You being my professor, now us being colleagues writing together.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And it's great to see how the Lord has really raised you up and brought your gifts to the fore and how you're using them. It's also great to see not just your academic gifts, but I would call them your leadership and vision gifts and your entrepreneurial gifts, how those have really been very catalytic, and not just a catalyst, but they've actually built things, which is why we have the book. So I'm really just great. I mean, I guess I say I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
It's kind of, you know, as the older guy, I guess, right? But no, it's great. So I'm in year 20 at Wheaton. In fact, this month ends year 20 because I started in January of 2000.
Wow.
So I'm an actual calendar year. My oldest daughter was born in August, and starting my career at Wheaton College with a 1-month-old would have been a disaster. So they let me start in the middle of the year. So year 20. Since 2007, I've been the director of the Center for Applied Christian Ethics at Wheaton. And so I teach theology and direct the Center for Applied Christian Ethics. You mentioned public theology. That's probably a good way to describe sort of my way of doing it. To me, talking about doctrine is very important. And it's also important to talk about, a lived theology. When you mentioned Haymanot, I think it's really important to point out that the idea of Haymanot, the meaning of it, is about, if you will, a theology that's not just what is confessed, but what is also conveyed in practice. And so I think it's really important to emphasize that. And for me, that's always kind of been really important. The fact that theology and ethics should not be, in two different zip codes, shall we say. They're in the same zip code as far as I'm concerned, because what is believed is not just to be stated, but Jesus said, "Follow me," not just talk about me. So I think the best way to describe my approach to things is to say I've always been inclined to sort of live at that intersection. I mean, it's fine that there are people who mainly talk about ethics and mainly talk about systematics, but I've always been sort of at the intersection. It's like, yes, absolutely be a public relations person for Christian doctrine, and I like to do that. But part of my reason for being a public relations person is to say, this is not just about what we say; it's about what we do. It's about the lived realities of our theology. So that's why, to me, you can't have a separation between theology and ethics. To me, it's always been together. So that's really been very important to me. The great part of this book, you may know, Vince, I had another book come out last week with called "Reckoning with Race and Performing the Good News in Search of a Better Evangelical Theology."
Wow.
If you have a library, you can get the book more cheaply because his Brill books aren't cheap. But it is definitely expensive. If you want to buy one book for the price of 4, then there's your book.
Do you have a copy with you? Can you hold it up?
I don't, because literally it was just released last week, and they are sending me my copies. And Brill's in the Netherlands, so it hasn't yet arrived. But if you look up Vincent Bacote and Brill, Brill, you will see the page for that.
Congratulations!
Yeah, thank you. So, to me, it's always about that interface about believing deeply and trying to live deeply as well.
Yeah, that's great. That really leads well into talking about a little bit more about this chapter that you've written for the book. And we just as a kind of a little preview or a roadmap for the readers. As I mentioned, there's an intro and a conclusion, but then in between we have various chapters. We have a couple of Old Testament, one New Testament. We have a patristics chapter. We have a modern history chapter, early modern. And then the final chapter is from a pastoral counseling and practical theology section. But before that, the 6th chapter is the one that you've written, Dr. Bacote, and it's entitled "Home Cooking: Evangelical Theology That Includes Us." Is the title of the 6th chapter that Dr. Bacote has written, and it is powerful. It's a great chapter. It's I mean, we're going to talk about it, but I just, one thing I love about it is how holistic it is. As you mentioned, Haymanot is an East African concept that goes back to the beginning of the church, and it speaks to the reality of the inseparability of ethics and doctrine and confession and lifestyle. And so I love how your chapter, even in terms of the genre, lives that out, in that it's theology and ethics, but it's biography. It's your own story. And so I don't want to give too much away at the outset, but you mentioned even in the chapter at the beginning, you mentioned the idea of being a public relations, kind of person for theology and for doctrine and things like that. But I wonder, even at the outset, if you could just give the readers a little bit of a general sense of like what the chapter's about, kind of what motivated you to write it, and kind of what your hopes are for that chapter in this volume, and also just more broadly.
Sure. I would say the aim of it is how we talk about dealing with our faith and dealing with the fact that, to put it this way, if you're part of a family, chances are there can be complications in your family. And how do you deal with the complications in your family? We're in a time where people talk a lot about cancel culture. Well, the Christian faith isn't really about cancel culture 101, right? It's about living with difficult people 101. And a lot of the chapter is negotiating how to deal with a faith community where there's a lot that resonates with you, but you also have to contend with things that disappoint you and sometimes create distress for you. And how do you negotiate all of that? And I think it's important to think about that, because the easier thing to do is just cancel somebody, to do what I call zero-sum thinking. I'm not the only person who calls it that, but it's easy to just say, hey, we love these people, we read everything that they say, don't read those people, they're the devil. When what the fact is that, and I've put this elsewhere, but no Christian who's going to love their neighbor as themselves wants people to approach them as somebody that's canceled. They want to be understood in their complexity rather than dismissed because of a dimension of their complexity. And so how do I practice engaging people in their complexity, telling the truth about the good and the bad? And so it's really about trying to negotiate that and thinking about what do you do? I'm not sure I use this metaphor in the chapter, but I've used it elsewhere. If you've bought the album and you like most of the songs, but some of the songs are really bad ones, so what do you do? You can't just throw out the album. I mean, these days, with digital, I guess you can just ignore it. But there was a time when you bought the album, you still have the whole album. It's all part of a piece. And I think you have to figure out how to understand what's going on with the bad songs, and to be able to tell the truth about them. And I think if you don't do that, I think it's easy to just not do the work that you really expect people to do when you want them to be generous toward you. And to me, it's important to continue to work at that practice of being generous, even when you deal with things that are really disappointing. So, chapter, that's what I want to do, and to talk about a particular example where I really had to negotiate a crisis experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's great. I love that analogy too with the album. And some folks these days might not be able to fully appreciate that when you can buy songs by the individual song. But I remember them days when you had to get them CDs or them tapes.
I have some of those in my office right over there.
You got them, yeah. And
I even have cassettes.
That's right. Yes, that's right. The cassettes. And I grew up. My pops had the albums too, the record, the vinyl, and the 8-tracks.
8-track. Oh my gosh!
And you gotta take it all. I remember one of the first CDs I ever bought in my life was Michael Jackson's History album.
All right.
It had like the one CD that all his greatest hits. Then the other CD that came with it was a bunch of garbage, and it was just terrible. But I had to get it all.
Right.
But Yeah, but no, that's a great example. And so, if we could go a little deeper into, exactly that, as you said, that crisis moment. We know that one of the main people that you engage in this chapter is somebody that I think a lot of your scholarship has drawn from and engaged with. A Dutch theologian, Abraham Kuyper. And so, I wonder if you could just give the audience a little bit of background on who this person is, why they're significant, for theology and Christianity, and maybe if you could let us know a little bit about what happened with that crisis moment.
Sure. Before that crisis moment, I can just point out to people that actually I have his picture here, right now, and I think that's an important thing because why do I have his picture when you hear this story? So, and that shelf right there is that's my Kuyper shelf, right? So Abraham Kuyper, 1837 to 1920. This year is the 100th anniversary of his death. There's actually a lot of stuff being written about that. I've done some interviews with a couple of different Dutch publications about that. He lived 1837 to 1920. He was prime minister of the Netherlands from 1901 to 1905. He's a minister who stepped away from being a pastor when he got involved politically. He was an organizer. He was an institution builder. He was what I call in my first book a walking public theology, really. And he was somebody whose theology was big picture about certainly caring about the church and about personal piety, but definitely caring about a faith that had to be a public faith. So for me, he's one of the first people I read that gave me theological language for public engagement, particularly coming from a kind of formation that had great dissonance with public engagement. Public engagement being maybe that's too worldly. But I had an intuition that there was a proper way for Christians to engage the public, that worldliness did not have to mean staying out of public things, whether it's politics, whether it's secular music, whether it's being involved in the structures of how the medical world works, whatever it is, right? That it was proper to Christians to participate in that, but I didn't have any theological language or categories for that, and Kuyper gave me those things. What he also gave me was the unanticipated gift of critical thinking, because I had to deal with the book for which he's most known are a collection of lectures he gave at Princeton in 1898 called the Stone Lectures. And in the beginning of it, there's language that I really liked about a doctrine called common grace, which is about God's generosity to the creation, a generosity that makes it possible for us to continue to obey that first command in Genesis 1 about stewarding the creation. The word stewardship isn't there, but that's basically my argument for what dominion is about in Genesis 1, 26 and 28. And so I like that. Although even in that first chapter, he makes reference to human development corresponding to the sons of Noah. And you can see where that is going. So I gave him a mulligan on that one. I was like, okay, late 1890s, a lot of people, were idiots about that. So, fine, keep reading the other stuff. Hey, I like this, I like this, I like this. And then, go back to our music metaphor. About 8 pages from the end, I hit one of those deep cuts that I wish I had never encountered. And that was when he's contrasting election and evolution. And in making this contrast, he says to the effect, he says this, to put it concretely, if you were a plant, you would rather be a rose than a mushroom. If an insect, a butterfly rather than a spider. If a bird, an eagle rather than an owl. Among the higher vertebrates, lion rather than hyena. And being man, rich rather than poor, talented rather than dull-minded. And then this was the thing, of the Aryan race than Hottentot or Kaffir. That when I read that, it was one of those moments where I wanted to say, please tell me that was, close my eyes, maybe, there's disappearing ink. It's not there. Make it go away. You open your eyes, it's still there. Right. So I have to deal with it, right?
And
And
Dr.
I remember putting the book down. It's like,
Mm.
what am I going to do? Because I was ready to sign the dotted line and say, no question, this guy will be my dissertation figure. No question, I'm going to read everything this guy's written and take cues from him about public engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really what critical thinking emerged, because I had to deal with a lot of stuff going on inside my head at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember hearing, imagining people saying things to me like, how could you study somebody who would say such things? How could you, just a whole raft of criticisms as to why would you ever give this guy the time of day?
Mm-hmm.
The thing was, for me, it was like nobody else I was reading was giving me the stuff about public engagement that he was giving me in terms of what I had read to that point.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got this music I like, and music that has put me into a crisis. What do I do with these competing forms of musical composition, shall we say? So I had to ask this question: is what he says here and what he said earlier about the curse of Ham stuff, is that interwoven with the things I really appreciate? The things that for me had finally given me theological categories for public engagement. Is there an unbroken relationship between things? Is it inherent in the theology of public life? And my conclusion was the answer is no. I mean, I'm happy to tell you that, yes, his picture's in my office. Yes, he's a racist. Now he sees a lot more clearly, I like to say. On the other side. And honestly, after that, I learned about other things he said that weren't so great about race, and the fact that he was a brilliant person, but a brilliant person who was subject to his gifts rather than really being able to steward them completely well. And so he was an imperfect figure. I mean, the feet of clay were more obvious than I first imagined. And so, over time, I discovered more about that. So I had to really discern what do you do with all this, and basically it was you deal with people as complicated figures, and you don't treat figures as messianic. And I think sometimes the way that people get exposed to figures, where people are taught to read somebody says, "Oh, I love Augustine," or "I love Irenaeus," or I love Aquinas, or "I love Edwards." We can just keep calling the roll, right? Then they're presented to us in this sort of one or two dimensional way where they basically have no flaws. Oh, read this. It's awesome. And that's presented to us as a kind of, complete endorsement of a figure. And so, of course, the thing is that read the figures with the complete endorsement, stay away from the rest. Well, the problem is that I tell students this all the time. The closer you get to any figure besides Jesus is the closer you get to your day of reckoning, to your crisis, like the one I experienced, where either because of something that they say, like I read, something that they did, and you can, if you read John Howard Yoder, there are things he did that crisis for people, or just things that they never talk about. You love all this stuff. It's like, hey, how come they didn't say anything about stuff? And you're like, how did you miss that? Well, because they aren't Jesus. That's why. And I shouldn't be treating them like Jesus. I treat them as people that are imperfect and incomplete, and even the most brilliant lights among them are missing something. And that there's some flaw that all of them have. So we have to be willing to reckon with that. That doesn't mean that you always assign this person, or that you engage in excuse making so that you can hold on to stuff, right? No, you're just being honest about what is there. Just tell the truth what is there. And if I'm telling the truth about what is there, to me, there's very helpful things for public engagement, and there are other things that are rather unhelpful. So yeah, his picture's here because for me, he's really framed a lot of the way that I think about why Christians aren't engaged public life. And I don't pull his picture down and do scream therapy at his picture, about everything that's wrong in the world because of him. um, you know, but you do have to address the criticisms of somebody. And if you're dealing with Kuiper, you have to deal with the fact that some people think he's the father of apartheid. I don't believe that he is. I believe, as Craig Bartholomew says, that he is, if you will, somewhat responsible, because there are things he wrote, like in a treatise called The Crisis in South Africa in the late 1890s, where he's trying to prop up the Boers against the British and talk about what kind of people they are. They may not be quite as polished as the British, but they are people of practical genius. And in their practical genius, they thought they forbid intermarriage between their people and Black South African women. And so there are ways that he talked about those kinds of things, but he never in his own theology said, hey, there's a structure of society that ought to include the separation of people on the basis of race or ethnicity. Can't get that. So I think it's not doing the work of seeing what's completely there. It's easy to say that because there are people who constructed apartheid that used his work, that because they use his work, people think that makes him the father. When the question you have to ask is, well, how did they use his work? Did his work accurately, or did they modify his legacy to use it in the service of the construction of this system of racial segregation and hierarchy in South Africa? Yeah, I mean, those are the kind of questions you have to ask about anybody. And then deal with people in their complexity. So I'm happy to say that he, to some degree, said things that may have given people reason to think that they could take it further, but you can't get there just from his theology itself, in my view.
Yeah, that's great. That's powerful. There's so much so many, I think, application points. And just real quick before I ask the next more kind of deeper question, just wanted to clarify something. The quote that you quoted it in the book as well. A couple of quotes, problematic quotes from Kuiper on 172 in the book. And just to clarify, Aryan race, when he says Aryan race, that's a reference to people he conceives to be of European or some kind of superior descent. And when he said
a certain European descent, because of course, as we know about the history of Europe, how should we put it? The Scots, the Irish, the English, the French, and the Spanish didn't all really like each other very much, and the Germans certainly thought they were superior to all of them. And they all, in terms of their pigmentation, we would say that they're white, but they saw themselves different ethnically. So you had ethnic superiority. So he means, generally a certain version of white people when he said
right,
but definitely Europeans.
Right. And then when he contrasts that, he says that one would want to be of the Aryan race rather than, and then he says the Hottentot or Kafir. And just to clarify, I think these are specifically kind of Dutch racial slurs for African people.
Well, no, they're just tribes in South Africa, but yeah, it's their categories.
Okay.
It's less about a slur, honestly, than just a description of a people group, honestly. Because in the context of that quote, his goal isn't to primarily spend time making a slur. He's just making a comparison of, he's saying Aryans are civilized, Africans are uncivilized. That's basically the kind of thing that he's saying, right? And that these people are more advanced in their culture. These people are not as advanced in their culture. And so the quote is, I think he's just saying it like, well, I mean, of course, if you had to be this or this or this, this is what you would choose. But he never, in his work, says anything positive about Africans. I mean, my historian friends, said that very clearly to me about that. So, unsurprisingly, like many Europeans, he saw a certain version of European hegemony.
Oh, okay. Thank you for I just wanted to just make sure our readers and our hearers understand.
Yeah.
What he's saying when he says Hottentot and Kafir.
It's not that he's thinking that, although In another quote, I mean, he says elsewhere in Calvinism and Art, he says, beauty does not enrich the whole world. The beautiful, the common, and the hideous exist side by side. And when he gets to people, he says, the Arab appeals to you by beauty of appearance. The Dutch are common. The Hottentot fills you with loathing. Now, and he's talking about, what you're, again, he's trying to talk about aesthetics, right? But the point is that he's talking about how a person, when they see some other people group, what your visceral response is going to be to their appearance or their ways of doing things. And so, I mean, that quote is closer to a slur, I think, or is a slur, honestly. I mean, now granted, he's not lifting up the Dutch there. He's saying that, we're kind of like average, but he's also making a value judgment about a particular group of people, and of course, he never went to Africa. So he did a tour of the Mediterranean, but like he never went to South Africa or the continent per se.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah. So we're, now, we understand that, and you've given us already, I think, some good, from your own story, but also even principles for other folks. And I just think this is so timely. I mean, just real quick to relate to what you're saying, I one of my kind of biggest things, I love kind of revealing early African theologians to the world. And there's a lot of people who really are, rightfully hungry to hear that, because we've really not heard a lot of that stuff.
Right.
And I remember when I was actually when I was an undergrad, and I took a church history class with another prof there at Wheaton, and we didn't hear about any non-white figures, but it was all white men, kind of from
or figures that weren't white, but nobody told you that they weren't.
Well, right, exactly. Like it was, and folks that even in the early church that only wrote in Greek or Latin, but the kind of the non-Western language speaking folks were always left out, and so I try to like reveal those. But then a lot of people will be like, "Oh, that's great! Vince is going to tell us about these African theologians that were perfect," and I'm like, "Well, like one of the favorite people I like to tell them about is Shenouda, a Coptic writer, who's the greatest." In the Coptic language, and he did all these great things for social justice and monasticism, but he also killed a person, and he like in the midst of whipping them in the monastery, and then like wrote it off and said, "Well, God must have wanted them dead." And it's like, this is terrible. You can't escape it. And so it's the same kind of thing.
Exactly.
Now, do I just say he didn't contribute anything when he's the greatest writer?
Exactly. It's like Calvin Servetus, right? It's like the John Calvin basically, I mean, to hear most people think of it, it's like Calvin was right there, and he was the first person to put the torch at the feet of Servetus when he was being burned, right? Now, he wasn't, but he didn't stop anyone from burning Servetus either, right? I mean, the only thing is he gave him a chance to recant and to become Trinitarian. But now it's like, all right, burn him. I mean, that's... So you have to just deal with the fact that people did these things.
That's right.
It really is a mistake to just keep this idea that a figure can only be messianic for you to appreciate anything about them.
Well, and I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit more deeply, because I also feel like there's just so many so many great application points to what you're saying, because I wonder if you could just maybe gospel Haymanot as a paradigm is really meant to, again, like be an alternative, or to be a resource for especially Black, anybody really, but especially Black students of theology and ministry leaders. And again, it's not to necessarily say that, for example, liberation or womanist theology is all bad, or that theology is all bad either, or to say that gospel Haymanot is perfect, because there's going to be flaws in anything. And so I wonder if you could just speak to, like, maybe a little bit more about, like, what would you, and you talk about it in the book, and I love how you even connect, even talk about Dr. King a little bit. And so I wonder, like, if you could just speak to, maybe as we start to wind down, like if you could maybe like give some encouragements or just thoughts to our listeners
Sure.
and our readers around, especially as a Black student, when you're coming into contact with Black theology and white theology, whether it's evangelical or mainline, when you're coming into contact with these sources, what advice would you give people on how to engage those things well?
Sure. The first thing is that read with generosity. Don't read as if you're reading a Messiah. Understand that there are things that people can do that can help you, and that there may be things that they do that you'll disagree with. So I remember I had to learn to grow into appreciation for James Cone, and there's a lot about James Cone to appreciate. But look, there are things I don't agree with about James Cone. But I also need to understand, if you know James Cone's story, his trajectory makes a certain kind of, it makes sense, right? But none of that means that I need to sign off on everything he ever read, or even most of what he read. But his story is really instructive. And things he observes are important things to observe. And I can observe those things without having to have, in my view, as having, in my view, a higher view of Scripture that he did, I think. And not holding all the positions he took on certain issues. But I can say all that and say, look, you can't not appreciate this guy. So appreciation doesn't have to be wholesale affirmation. And I think sometimes when people finally get to read somebody that's, we're reading somebody from my people, it's like, what I would say is, don't put the weight of this person saving everything for you, because you're dealing with a human being who missed something. Okay? Nobody is going to tell you everything or deliver everything for you. Okay, you're asking that person to be Jesus, so no figure should be Jesus. But you can learn a lot from people without them having to be Jesus. So read them with generosity, and it's okay to disagree with them. But even in your disagreements, ask questions like, what was their training? What were the questions that they were addressing? Not how are they answering my questions? I mean, it's okay to get to the point about how they're answering my questions, but first I need to ask, what questions were they addressing? And then what questions they were addressing, and how did they go about answering it? What resources did they have to pursue that? How did their education enable them to do that? How did their context orient them towards a certain way of going about addressing those questions? All that stuff I have to ask. And I think in doing that, it helps us to engage those people as complex figures. So that I can say, I like a lot about what you're saying, but there's a lot of this other stuff. I'm like, no, actually, I think some of what you're saying is for the birds. That's okay to say that. And I think it's also important to say, think about what your own convictions are. My convictions about the gospel, don't need to change, because there are people who believe the same gospel who reveal areas of growth and sanctification that they don't even know that they need. And because I'm aware that they really need to be more sanctified about certain things, or by even being able to recognize certain things, that's not reason for me to say that the problem is with the gospel per se, or denomination per se. I mean, there may be some things to address there, but I need to ask first, okay, look, what actually are my particular convictions about this thing, whatever it is? And then if somebody's failing to live up to that, then the problem is that they're failing to live up to it, not the problem with the gospel itself. To be able to discern that difference. And sometimes I think what happens is, and it's a hazard of leadership, honestly, is that if a person is a prominent representative of a tradition, and then they fail to do something, or they do things that are bad of all kinds. It can be morally, it can be in terms of ideas, it can be in terms of, obviously race, economics, all kinds of stuff. I think, okay, the whole thing needs to be thrown out. But really, what we need to do in that moment is to ask, wow, they're missing something. And then ask, what is the cautionary tale that could happen with me? How do I avoid the cautionary tale with me? Then discern, is the problem with their beliefs and where their beliefs took them, or is it that they didn't go where their beliefs should have taken them? Because I think a lot of times people just assume that because people went a certain way that their beliefs took them there. I'm like, no, actually, I think the problem is, and this is part of what I'm arguing in this new book, is that evangelical theology doesn't display the good news as much as it should. It gives you a diminished version of the good news in articulation and practice. But that doesn't mean get rid of evangelical theology. No, it means put the Bible in front of the face of evangelical theology and say, do you really believe this entire book? And so I think, you can say it to a tradition that is supposedly putting the Bible central. So we have to be willing to do that. And the same thing is let's say somebody goes through their phase of being frustrated with the Black church because they don't think it's intellectual enough, or they don't think that, or they think it's too emotional, etc. What I would say is, do you know why the people are being emotional? And I say this to somebody who had learned this. Because I didn't understand what some of these older people were doing. It's like, why are they always going, Lord, Lord, or whatever? I said that. What are they doing? Why they say that during this church service, right? Well, I understand now. And the point is that there are people who don't have probably half the education I have, right? They don't have any of these degrees or whatever, but they deeply love Jesus. They've got the core of the faith, and they are very passionate about their faith. And I might want them to have more content to what they believe, or to build out more of what they believe. But that's not a reason for me to have disdain for them because they don't know as much as I know. I'd be asking why, there's still something going on here about why these people hold on, why these people persevere, why these people face all kinds of horror in the world, yet they don't give up Jesus. In fact, here's something really interesting. I heard James Cone say at the Society of Christian Ethics, I think it was in 2009, he said the entire reason for his project was trying to understand the Jesus who his parents believed, because he could not understand why these people seem to believe the same Jesus those white people believe, the white people who were mistreating them, but they were on to that Jesus. And the point was that he was discovering, okay, they were on to something. What were they on to? What's going on with this Jesus that he's so worth holding on to that even people who seem to say the same thing about them but are terrible people, you are able to distinguish between the Jesus they confess and their failures in practice. And so I think it's really important to be able to do that. And please understand, that can be really hard when you're working through your own stuff, when you've got your own pains, your own traumas, your own disappointments. All that's important. Those are important things to work through. But in working through them, we need to work through them with discernment. And honestly, we need others to help us working through them so that we're able to navigate the complexity. Because again, the problem is that, let's say somebody grew up in an evangelical setting, whatever their race is, they get disenchanted and they go somewhere else. What they need to understand is that, trust me, the crazy people are over there too. The disappointing people are over there too. So it's not whether you have crazy people, whether you have disappointing people, whether you have bad actors, they're everywhere. The question is, how do you negotiate the relationship between people's failure to live up to their faith and that faith itself? And I think that's an important thing for us to be always thinking about, because it's just so easy to just take the easy route and just cancel it. And the problem is that we have to ask ourselves, do I want to be canceled because of my imperfections? Because I think all of us have probably some imperfections of some kind. And how do we want people to treat us with our imperfections? What kind of mercy do we want? What kind of generosity do we want towards us? How much of an explainer do we want to be able to give to people rather than having somebody say, you get no explainer, you're out? And my point is that we need to be the ones who exercise that generosity toward others. I mean, this is a version of loving your neighbor as yourself.
Wow. Man, thank you so much, Dr. Bacote. This is powerful. This is great. This is good stuff. And so again, if anybody has not had the chance to do it, definitely get Gospel Haymanot, Constructive Theology and Critical Reflection on African and Diasporic Christianity.
And you should know, if you didn't participate in it, that there was a great Haymanot conference earlier. I'm telling you, folks, if you were not part of it, and Vincent did not pay me to do this, you have no idea the quality of presentations that you missed. It was absolutely fantastic. So there'll be future ones. You definitely want to check it out. It was absolutely so needed, so spectacular, and a great opportunity to dive into Haymanot conversation.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bacote. That's right. That and definitely we're going to be that. This was the inaugural one, and again, this is it's really the only public, open, academic Black Haymanot theology conference around, and so that's really focused on the academy. And so definitely come around. It's going to be October 21 is going to be the next one, and also there's a journal that's going to be coming out. The proceedings of that, if you weren't at the annual meeting, the proceedings are going to be published in a journal with the same publisher. Just a shout out to UMI. That's who published Gospel Haymanot book. They're going to be publishing the Haymanot journal, and these things will be available. And the idea is to do more of what Dr. Bacote went before me. He was my professor, and what we're trying to do is to create more resources for Black scholars who are coming into the academy, and that really reflect the fullness of the Black church, that holistic Haymanot. And so that's really what we're trying to do, is craft out paradigms. And again, this idea of being gospelist means to grab firmly to the high view of Scripture that Dr. Bacote was talking about, and to the liberation and justice that many times in evangelicalism has been lacking. And so that's really what the idea of it is, both in the book and the journal and in the annual meeting. And you can be a part of that society as well. It's on the website, www.meacham.org. That's meachum.org. You can join and be a part. But again, it's not perfect. And so again, we want to be taking these things that Dr. Bacote, these gems that Dr. Bacote has given us, and really be engaging all of these paradigms and all of these concepts critically, and again, trusting only in Jesus. And so again, definitely get the book so you can go deeper into Dr. Bacote's story, because there's so much in here that we didn't have time to get at in this interview. Even just in his chapter, let alone all the others. And we will have other interviews here on the Jude 3 Project as well from some of the other authors in this book. But at this time, I just want to give God glory and thank you so much for Dr. Bacote, for the journey, for the mighty long way that he's brought Dr. Bacote from, and to be able to teach all of us. And Dr. Bacote, I wonder if you could just maybe give any parting words. We know you have your book that's out with Brill. Definitely get that as well. But I wonder just any parting words you might have about just how the audience might be able to connect with you, things that are coming up for you. Any things like that as we.
Sure. Check out Christianity Today. I was sort of like the person who was curating this race set before us set of articles in Christianity Today. So I've done some writing for them. And over at my website, vincentbacote.com, there's a speaking calendar over there. I'm very happy to virtually or otherwise come and speak with people. I'm also moving into the coaching space a little bit, so I'm happy to talk with church leaders about how their faith builds out to building bridges to the public life. To me, it's a very important thing to do. It's a Haymanot thing, right? I mean, the holistic faith. So I'm trying to expand that dimension of what I'm doing as well. I've done some of that already. Last summer started out really well, I think. And pray for me as I try to finally finish an eschatology and ethics book that should have been done a couple of years ago. So that's my prayer request to everyone who watches.
Oh, amen. Amen. Well, we will definitely be praying with you on that. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Bacote, for being here. Thank you for this chapter and all of your scholarship. And thank all of you for tuning in to another podcast of the Jude 3 Project. Again, we are here to help you know what you believe and why, and to equip the body of Christ. And so we're thankful to be here on today. God bless you all. And we will be back with another interview for Gospel Haymanot soon. But for now, we want to say God bless you, and we will see you later.